All right, Perhacs. It's Monday, and welcome to the Monday Mojo. I call it the Mojo Monday, Monday Mojo. YouTube Monday. Release your trauma now. With everything that's going on in the world right now, craziness from overseas, here in the United States, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of things that are affecting us to become traumatized. How can you not, right? And so I was actually going to go into a different topic because of what happened this weekend. I wanted to go into trauma because it's really one of the biggest factors when I coach with somebody, when I work with somebody. Even though we may start out at a business relationship, scaling their business, getting their business to grow, ultimately the conversation comes back to past traumas, current traumas, what's going on, and how can I assist that person to release and let go of the trauma. And so today we're gonna go into that in some detail. Obviously, within a limited amount of time we have is the amount, but I'm going to give you some really good ideas. We're going to talk about some traumas. We're going to talk about some specifics. I'm going to give an example, kind of like a case study. We're going to go into trauma bonds. What is it about trauma bonds, and how you can remove those shackles from you? If you notice this image where I'm there, and you see behind these people in shackles, they're they're releasing their trauma, and that's what we all have to do. And if you know a little bit about my story, you know I have some traumatic things that happen in my background, but I don't claim that they're the most traumatic of anyone else. And what you have to realize is that trauma affects you mentally, emotional, physically, and it comes from so many different aspects. Most of it comes from our childhood. Most of it comes from when we were a child, between the ages of 0 to 4, and then it goes to 4 to 8, and it expands out. Some people's most traumatized times are when they were in high school. Maybe they were bullied, made fun of. And so just to give you an idea what this looks like, right? And I have my handy whiteboard here. This is just a great thing when you're doing a session like this, right? So I always draw my stick figures. Some people like them, some people don't, but hey, too bad if you don't like it. You can always leave. So what happens is that this trauma, it pockets, right, as stagnant energy, right? And it goes into different parts of your body. This is where a lot of disease comes from. This is where a lot of illness comes from. Not always, but it gets pocketed into these areas of your body, these traumas, and they get wedged in there. And it's extremely difficult to release sometimes. It's either easier, it's difficult, depending upon how deep it's in there. But it's really up to you, because a lot of times people hold on to stuff that they should just let go and release. And so when it comes to trauma, one of the biggest things is understanding the type of trauma. Is it acute, chronic, complex trauma? Complex trauma could be, years of sexual abuse, years of emotional abuse, years of physical abuse, right? It really doesn't matter. And here's the other thing, is that one person's trauma may not really affect them, but something else. Like, for instance, somebody could be verbally abused, and it's just, oh, that's just the way my dad was, or my mother was, or whatever, right? It doesn't bother me. And maybe it doesn't. But maybe your dad beat you or something, and that really affects you, like, oh my God, I'm afraid, right? And then you have another person that says, hey, my dad could beat me all day long, but it's what he said to me verbally that hurt me so bad. Oftentimes it's verbal, emotional abuse that hurts us the most. That's the trauma that affects us the most. That's what we remember the most. Because as I go into this, and again, there's no way I can cover it, but I'm going to give you a couple resources that you want to look at. The first one is you want to look at manipulation. It's my book, Master Secrets of Covert Persuasion and Hypnotic Influence, and you'll get to learn how these traumas get a hold inside of your body. Now, I don't explain it as a trauma, but anytime someone or an event is causing an influence, a persuasion, causing you to do something, it's all the same. It's a mental engagement. It's embedding. In hypnotic influence, we call it embedded commands, but in this case, it's an embedded trauma. I can embed a trauma inside of you if I really wanted to, if I was that nasty. But here's the thing. There are individuals within the government and in other groups that do this type of thing. They place traumas into people to hurt them. Now, I know that sounds crazy, right, and wild, but just look around. Open your eyes. If you don't have your eyes open to what's going on in the world, if you went through the last 4 years and you don't realize that you were traumatized, that you were indoctrinated, that you were manipulated, that you're still bearing the remembrances of that, and they'll be there for quite some time, right? And so you get these unresolved traumas that you have to get through. Okay, you get anxiety, depression, flashbacks, and it can manifest physically, chronic pain, fatigue, and a lot of times people have an amazing amount of trauma built up, and they just have to release it. So how do you, I always show releasing, pulling energy, stagnant energy out of my body. If you've been around me long enough, you'll know that. You pull the trauma out. You pull the trauma right out of the body. So I go to my meditation room so we can, I want you to start to understand. I'm going to go in a little more detail in a little bit on some specific exercises, but again, you want to pull negative energy out. I know that sounds simplistic, but sometimes it's the most simplistic things that you can do that are actually the most effective. I want to explain something. So you've built up this trauma, and it's in your body, and so you want to release it. You got to get rid of it, whatever it takes. Because let me explain something. I'm going to explain a client of mine. Of course, I'm not going to use any names, so we can protect the innocent. You know that old saying. But let me show you this. So let's take a look at this. So this person has a lot of amazing, amazing qualities, right? They're fun. They make money. They're an executive. So they're highly respected, well-spoken, right? Well-spoken. Get along with others, socially. They're great socially. They're fun to be around, as I mentioned. Good at sports, right? Good looking. This is just one person, right? Good looking. This is a client of mine. Good looking. So when you look at this person, this is what you see. But what you don't see is all the trauma that this person has had to go through. So like the iceberg analogy, and this is what we're doing, is that these traumas are under the layer. Unless you let somebody in and let them know about it, they're not going to know about it. So in this person's situation, they've got family divorce, meaning their father and mother, right? Separation of the family, brothers going to different places. You've got children with issues. One child is transitioning from a girl to a boy. Very traumatizing. If you have a child that's going through that's not easy, right? The brother of this person commits suicide in a church, in the back of the church, while the family's going to church. Takes a gun in the back and shoots himself. Okay? He himself is divorced, has a hard time with relationships, although to meet him, he's one of the most affable people you could meet. Like I said, good looking, socially funny. You would think that he would get along with everybody. He does, but he has challenges with relationships. Okay? Best friend, maybe not his best friend, but a friend that he's known for years, and killed his girlfriend, then himself. Okay, is that enough? Is that enough trauma? This is an actual person, an actual client, that if you were in the room with them, you'd never know any of this stuff unless they told you. But what you would see is you would see all this other stuff. So somebody comes to me and they're traumatized. It takes a couple coaching sessions for me to get to this point. But when we get to this point, the question is, what's bothering you? What in your past has caused you to want to get this trauma released? What is this trauma? So you're identifying it. You need to do the same. Now, most of us don't have all of this, right? Some of us have a lot of it. Divorce, separation, could be a lot, estrangement from your family, children, relatives. And with all the political crazy stuff that's going on these days, you got families that are in like civil war. Some on this side, some on that side. They're not going to bend the knee to the other. It creates a trauma. Okay, it creates a negative energy, right? So what do? This is a lot of stuff. So you really have to talk out each one. And the way that you're going to start working on this is you literally have to detach and compartmentalize. Right? So you have to take each of these things and you have to detach from them. Because if you don't, and believe me, with all these things here, if you had all these things, and many of you have other things that are there, right? Might have some kind of sexual abuse or some kind of, weird stuff going on. But the thing is, if you focus on it, you can cause it to expand, right? As the mind focuses, it starts to expand. And so whatever that trauma is, what you have to do is you have to release the trauma, detach from it, right? You'll probably never release it fully because it's a trauma, right? And just like, everything that you've ever learned or thought in your entire life, it's always going to be with you, always. And the same things with some of these traumas. But what you can do is you can remove them as quickly as you can by pushing that energy out, right? Detach and compartmentalize, right? And there are effective trauma release, so when I was putting this together, obviously, I thought about what's the, if you have past trauma, what do you usually do? You usually go to a therapist. Nothing wrong with that, but it depends on the therapist. Most therapists are worse than you are. That's why they became therapists, because they were so messed up mentally, they had to figure it out. Now, what I do different when I'm coaching someone, I'm not a therapist, obviously, so I'm not trying to say that I am. But see, what I'm doing differently is I'm looking at it from the perspective of performance. So if you want to be a high performance individual, man or woman, you've got to release the trauma so that you can become more high performance. And a lot of athletes that are high performance have trauma in their performance. Now, I mentioned to you several times that I have a program that I've been using as a sponsor for these videos, and it's the Quantum Maximizer. Now, inside of the Quantum Maximizer is a bonus that I put in there for you. It's called the Powerful Man and the Powerful or the Powerful Woman. And it's the most in-depth study of performance subliminals. Let's say, put it this way, performance of how your mind works when it comes to performance that you're probably ever going to see. I break it down step by step. Now, is it the best thing in the world? I don't know, because I can't compare myself to others because I haven't seen what other people have done, but I can tell you this, it will work for you. Now, again, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I'm leading you to a resource that you can access for very little to get the powerful man and powerful woman. And then, of course, the Quantum Maximizer is designed to remove trauma on an ongoing basis. So again, I always say, hey, should I even mention any of these products? Because the fact of the matter is, I don't want this to be a sale. This is not a sales pitch. It's designed to help you get away from the trauma because it's everywhere. These days, this is the craziest time I've ever been in I'm 60 years old. Matter of fact, I had trauma this last weekend. One of my best friends died. 59 years old. He was going to be 60 on Wednesday, 2 days from now. And he passed away on Saturday. Got some kind of cancer, and it took him fast. And it's traumatizing to me because it's a buddy of mine, a friend. And what's traumatized me most about it is that I haven't reached out to him in a year, 2 years maybe, probably 2 years. He moved to Florida. He's tremendously wealthy. I mean, just fabulously wealthy. Done a great job in business. And it's traumatizing to me, but it's also traumatizing to the family. And I see it from that perspective, his wife, his kids, his friends, his family. This trauma expands out. So just because, you look at it, that's why you have to detach. Because if you don't detach, you can focus on something and it'll drive you crazy. And a lot of people do that. That's why people are mentally ill, is because they focus on too many things. They literally go down a rabbit hole of what's going on. So, when I showed you this picture here of my coaching student, client, whatever you want to call it, you look at this. How do you get through something like that? You got to compartmentalize. You've got to detach. And then you've got to take them and start removing them one at a time. And you got to think about it and get rid of it, right? Now, you may have to do this over and over again. That's why I teach a meditation method that's designed to remove all this stuff. But it's not one shot. I mean, I meditate every day. I have affirmations every day. If you want to work out and get in great shape, more than likely you're working out every day. If you don't work out every day, you're not going to be in that great of shape. That's the way it is. You don't watch your diet, you're not going to lose weight. I probably could stand to lose a few, but I guess maybe I enjoy eating more than I do losing the weight, right? So there you have it. But I want you to release your trauma now. What is a trauma bond? Are you trapped in trauma bonds? Are you going through something over and over again that you feel like you're in prison that you can't get away from? Trauma bonds form in relationships, abusive or toxic type of dynamics, right? And there's psychological mechanisms behind these trauma bonds. And the reason I bring it up is because, man, I can't tell you how many people that, before I started actually coaching with people, you see things, but you don't realize until you start coaching with someone, they start opening up to you and sharing with you the trauma level of just about everyone that I've ever coached is at a like maximum level. Very few people that I meet that don't have trauma. They usually have a high level of trauma, but nobody knows about it. I uncover it because I'm there to help them. I want to help them get through that, right? So a trauma bond is something that happens is that you're put into a pattern of behavior with somebody. And like I said, it could be abuse. A lot of times it's in a relationship. It's abusive relationships that could be physical, emotional, verbal, spiritual. They could be, there's a lot of things. One thing I would tell you to look up and again, this is going down the rabbit hole. It really depends on how deep you want to go in a rabbit hole with a lot of these topics, right? And when it comes to trauma, as I've mentioned many times before, you've got to uncover what that is. Go through my hypnotic influence stuff. You'll learn a ton there. You'll begin to apply it, but more importantly, you get to understand the manipulative actions that the government and groups will do to influence you. Look up MK Ultra. Now, some of you will do that and say, oh, that sounds like conspiracy theory and nonsense, but all you got to do is look around and you can see these things are going on. But so these trauma bonds oftentimes are created by someone that is using it against another person. The best case example is a husband abusing a wife physically, and that wife won't leave because he's built such a trauma bond with her that he's probably gives her just enough to keep her in there, and then he beats her again, and then it's a cycle, right? And these behaviors and thought patterns are associated with these trauma bonds. And the fact of the matter is that the more it happens, so if this is the person that's being abused, these trauma bonds, just like I was showing you with the trauma, these bonds are like being tied into your body, right? Because they're really keeping you in a place that you don't want to be, either mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever the case might be. You're stuck. You're like in a prison. It's a self-imposed prison. And the reason this is harmful is because it perpetuates a cycle of abuse and dysfunction. And the problem is that the emotional and psychological toll is unbelievable. And you have some people that understand what these trauma bonds are, and they know how to manipulate somebody. And it's really, I say MK Ultra, but I also want you to take a look at cults, any cult, right? Any cult. And I want you to look at what they do, because they create trauma bonds. What they also do is they expose trauma bonds. And what they'll do is they'll say, we're going to help you to remove that trauma bond. Become involved with our group. We love you. We're going to take care of you. You're now with the new family. You don't have that trauma anymore. What they're not telling you is you're going to have a whole new set of trauma, because they're going to totally manipulate you and control you. And so you have to break free from the bonds. How do you break free from the trauma bond? Most of the time, breaking free from a trauma bond is removing yourself from a situation. I want you to check out this MK Ultra, cults. How many of you have been in the military? Military is extremely cultish behavior, because they have to be. They have to indoctrinate you. They have to indoctrinate you. Guess what? Every company you work with indoctrinates you on the company, and they tell you why they're better than the other company. I want you to think about these things from the perspective of how much this has been going on your entire life. Your parents have been indoctrinated. Your spiritual leaders have been indoctrinating you. And in some cases, sometimes these people are indoctrinating you, and they do not have your best interest in mind. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And you have to look at that and say, okay, am I being manipulated for my best interest, or am I being manipulated for somebody else's best interest, right? And that's really what these trauma bonds, it's like being bound, right? But so you have to relieve yourself of the bond by moving yourself out. That's the situation. MK Ultra was a program designed to psychologically manipulate people and set up in their mind different chambers that they could access at any given time in order to get this person to do what they wanted them to do. Now, I know that sounds incredibly almost impossible. However, as you go and look in just what I've already showed you, and you start investigate how these things work and how the mind works, once you understand how the mind works, it has these compartments that you can set up many, many different ways. That's how they can teach somebody to have multiple personalities. And coming up in the martial arts and in the internal side of the martial art, there are groups, there are sects, sects, right? Just so we're sure we know what we're talking about, sects that actually manipulate you into believing certain things. And sometimes they're on the right side of the law and sometimes they're not. And so you have to look at these things and understand how these work, because quite frankly, the way things are going in the world right now, you got to be prepared to be more manipulated than ever before. They've already tested you. They've already created trauma bonds with certain things. They're going to do it again. They've always been doing it anyway. It's just a little bit more overt now. But the reason I bring this up is I want you to understand that you can break free from these things. But you have to remove yourself from the situation. If you work at a toxic company, you need to remove yourself. If you're in the military and it's not working out, you got to remove yourself. If you're in a relationship that's toxic, you got to remove yourself from it. Cults, same thing. If you look at cults' behavior, they have people that are called cult deprogrammers, and they go in and remove somebody from the cult and they deprogram them. What is it? So if they're deprogramming them, that means that they've been programmed. Now, usually the way the cults work, or any group, is they indoctrinate the young. If you look at this concept and understand it, you'll understand the whole concept of the manipulation and these trauma bonds. Is that most people can be manipulated the best between the ages of 15 and 25, maybe 30. But there's this 10-year period, 15 to 25, where kids, young adults, are the most impressionable. That's why universities are influencing our children. And, maybe you like the way they're being influenced. I personally don't think it's the best, but they're being influenced. And sometimes that influence is good and sometimes it's not. And so, but that's just one aspect. Look at religious organizations, Christians, look at Muslims, look at Jewish. They all look to recruit in this age. They're not going after 40-year-olds, 45-year-olds, 50-year-olds. They're not coming after anyone my age and trying to convert them, because they realized that we're already set in our ways for the most part. That's the way it is, most people. But for the younger people, they're easily manipulated. They're easily programmed. Look around and see what's going on with the media, see what's going on with the political machine, see what's going on with the worldwide governments, and take a look at the programming that's going on. Open your eyes, open your mind, and you're going to get the results. But it all comes down to helping you to be able to remove these trauma bonds. Let's go into a process to begin to release trauma. And let's go, let's just go to the meditation room, why don't we? The first thing is to recognize the trauma. What is the thing that is traumatized you the most? And it depends on who you are, right? So like some I've said, it's sexual manipulation and sexual abuse. Sometimes it's verbal abuse. Sometimes it's in some cases it's it could be something really small, but you got to recognize it. What is the thing that's traumatizing you? I have 4 kids, and I found that the things that traumatized them that I said and did to them were things that, from my perspective, were extremely mild based on my upbringing. But to them, it was pretty traumatizing, right? Like, so for instance, when I was doing the martial arts, and I've always done the martial arts, but when I was actually teaching it, I would take my kids, all of them, with the exception of my youngest, because she was so much younger than the other kids. I would take my oldest son, my middle son, and my daughter, and I taught private lessons, and I would bring them over, usually at separate times, and I would have them spar with these kids. And some of my kids liked it, sparring, and other ones were like, hated it, didn't want to do it at all. And so that was a trauma to them, right? We've had to release that from them so that it didn't, bother them, right? So that's number one, acknowledging the trauma. Number two is seeking professional help. And you can do it on your own if you want, or go to therapy. Therapy's never a bad thing, or a coaching or mentor. It's really very similar. They're parallel type of situations, a little bit different, right? Different roads going the same way. But the fact of the matter is, you have to look at it and say, what is my outcome? A lot of times therapy is like a long-term solution to remove the trauma, but what else happens after that? When you hire a coach or a mentor, you're usually removing the trauma for a reason. Higher performance in your work, your job, your business, your relationships. That's the key. And that's where I believe, my opinion, that where therapists might not have as much of a power, right? Unless it's a like a sports psychologist or something like that, right? But you can use self-help techniques that are going to get you into a mindset. So number one is meditation, and obviously we're in the meditation room. So it's as simple as just sitting with your hands on your lap. You want to put them in any kind of configuration, it doesn't matter, and just relax, and just tell yourself, I'm calm and relaxed. And you bring the energy down and out through your feet. And the energy that you're bringing out is negative energy. It's almost like you're scraping the negative and you're pushing it out your feet. You're taking the trauma and you're removing it and pushing it out your feet. You can just sit and relax. Some people sit like this. The thing with meditation, a lot of people get into this. You've got to sit a certain way. You've got to have your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Yeah, those are all good things, but they're not make or break. You know what's make or break with meditation? Freaking doing it on a daily basis. Putting in the flight time. I can't tell you how many people tell me about all these exotic techniques, and I say, how many hours have you put in doing that? Well, I do it every now and then. Okay, well, I don't even need to talk to you because you haven't done enough. You haven't put in 10,000 hours. I don't need to talk to you. But it becomes a ritual, which now becomes a part of your life. And so when you're doing the meditation techniques to remove trauma, it's simply putting yourself in a place of relaxation and you just call out that trauma. I rebuke you. It no longer affects me. It's still there somewhere in my body, but it no longer affects me. The other thing you want to imagine as you're doing your meditation. And I've used this in one of my books. I've written about this in one of my books. And that is this, is you, when you're meditating, you imagine the screen, right? The screen in your mind, and you're focused on the problem, right? And let's say the problem is like this. You know, it's taking up that much of the screen. What you want to do, outside of detaching from the problem, right? The trauma, is you want to detach, but you want to you want to compartmentalize it. But you want to take that, and you want to take that, well, let's just move it from this side. Let's just show it from this. So that was the big size. And what we want to do is we want to incrementally take the power away from this trauma. And how we're going to do that is by incrementally decreasing the power that it has over us. And this is a mental exercise. And if you wanted to do it on a piece of paper, on a board, you could do it. But it's best when you do it inside your mind, as you're meditating, when your body's fully relaxed. And you keep shrinking it. You keep shrinking it down. Shrink it down. Shrink it down to where it's insignificant. And even though that trauma played a part in your life at one point, and maybe it bothered you and maybe it didn't, and maybe sometimes it bothered you and maybe it didn't, but it was trauma nonetheless. Now you take that trauma and you make it super small. You might not even be able to see that, but it's a grain of sand. And you take that grain of sand and you move it to the bottom corner. It doesn't matter which one. Could be that one. Could be that one. Quite frankly, it could be the top corner. It doesn't matter. I like pushing things down, though. And you take that trauma and you squeeze it. Squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it. Until it's like a grain of sand. Like a salt. And you take that and you put that at the bottom. If this is our screen, see that screen? I drop it. Still there. The trauma's still there. But it's this big now. It's this big. It's no longer that big. We've taken it and we've condensed it and we've made it almost infinitesimal, so small. That's how you reduce and release the trauma. And then using an exercise like pulling the energy down and out the feet. Now again, the simplest things are the things that work. You don't have to go through so much things that are unnecessary. But again, the biggest thing that I notice with people that I coach and that I mentor, it's not a technique issue. It's not a methodology. It's an implementation issue. Everybody wants the information. Very few put in the implementation. Are you working out every day? Are you training every day? Are you meditating every day? Are you thinking every day? Are you focusing on your goals every day? Are you focusing on your subliminals every day, on your affirmations, your self-talk? Are you doing this every day? If you're not, that's why you're not getting the results that you want. And so then these traumas build up more. And so you have to go back in and release them. Make them small. detach. That's how simple it is. It's also how hard it is, because you've got to do it on a daily basis. But if you take this approach to making that happen, you're going to get the results. I've never coached or mentored anyone in my almost 30 years, it'll be 30 years this fall in the internal side of things. I've never coached anyone that trained on a consistent basis that didn't get spectacular results. Bottom line. And if you do that, you will get spectacular results as well. I've enjoyed sharing. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic day. So long.